Started. Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Piacentini, President and CEO for Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, and welcome to the 6th webinar of the Climate Toolkit. It's a pleasure to have all of you with us today. Our conversation today is on integrated pest management, indoors and out. And we have IPM specialists presenting today from the Smithsonian Gardens, Hillwood Museum and Gardens, and Phipps. IPM is an important part of an institution's plan. To address climate change. Most non-organic pesticides and fertilizers are fossil fuel-based, and they impact climate change at every step of their life cycle, from manufacture to transportation and application. This issue is most pronounced in commercial agriculture, of course, but at the level of museums, gardens, and zoos, we can make changes that our guests can see, learn from, and demand from other industries. We are trusted resources and are in a position to lead by example. And our integrated pest managers, by exhibiting best practices and explaining those best practices, can play an essential role in leadership. Before we get started, I wanted to report that the toolkit is now up to 54 institutions strong, serving more than 43 million annual visitors. I'm also excited to announce that representatives of the Climate Toolkit will be appearing at the AZA, AAM, and APGA meetings in April, May, and June. So please stop by and say hello, and make sure to recommend your fellow professionals that they stop by and see us as well. As the presentation begins, you're welcome to use the Zoom chat function to enter questions, which we will answer after both talks have concluded. Our first presenter is Holly Walker of the Smithsonian Gardens. Holly?
Thank you very much. Give me one moment to share my screen. All right. Can everybody see my screen all right? Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. I am Dr. Holly Walker. I am the plant health specialist with the Smithsonian Gardens here in Washington, D.C. Today, we're going to talk about the impacts of climate change, but we're mostly going to focus on concepts of integrated pest management, which Richard did a fantastic job starting that out and discussing some of the reasons why it's so important when we're talking about climate change. I'm going to talk a little bit about the aspect that maybe a lot of people don't think about, which is how to use integrated pest management, especially in your gardens or institutions, but doing it in a way that is effective and timely consistent with what you're doing. So let's get started. So again, let's talk a little bit about what integrated pest management is. And you guys are going to hear a variety of different definitions. Integrated pest management is a broad concept in many ways, but I always like to start out with this one in particular, which is that integrated pest management is an environmentally conscious strategy for managing pest species. And it really gets to the heart of the idea is that we need to be protecting the environment with the ways in which we manage our landscapes and our institutions. Now, going back to the idea of how does integrated pest management relate to climate change, IPM has this great ability to be an effective tool for monitoring pest populations, looking at invasive species, noting some of these different phenological changes that are occurring, and obviously reducing emissions that can help reduce the impacts of climate change. So let's talk about getting started with IPM. Not everybody has the ability to have somebody like myself or like some of my other colleagues who are going to be on here presenting who is specialized just to do integrated pest management or plant health at their institutions. And so it can seem very daunting and a little bit overwhelming when you're first trying to put this kind of strategy in place for IPM at your institution. And I always like to break this down into like the simplest parts, like where would you really start if you wanted to start using more integrated pest management at your institution? And it would probably surprise people. A lot of people think biological control, we'll talk about those things, reducing pesticides, we'll talk about those things, but I always start at the basics, which is this idea of scouting. So scouting is just this concept that you are going out and looking at your plants. You're looking at the things that are in the environment that you're trying to protect, that you're trying to display. And then you want to make sure that you understand what's going on there, especially in terms of what could damage your plants. And this can include things like insects, this can include fungi, this can include plant pathogens. So it's a very wide umbrella of things that you are looking for. And sometimes it's not an easy answer when you're looking, and you might see something and go, well, I see this pest, but the reality is that that pest is there for a multitude of other reasons that are already in place. But by scouting, it will start to help you get to that framework where you're starting to see why these things are occurring and how these things are occurring. But even before we get to that point, scouting is something that I always hear people say they want to do. So here I do most of the scouting, but our staff do as well. But I have a 2-week rotation where I go out and scout all of our grounds every 2 weeks and do reports. Most people who don't have somebody dedicated to that task, they go, I want to scout, but I never get to it. That's easy. We all get so busy. So it's hard sometimes to make scouting a priority, but it's something that you have to put at the front of your agenda when you talk about maintaining your plants and maintaining plant health. So one of the easiest ways to do this is just add it to your schedule. Make a schedule for yourself. And if you know that you are always in the same beds or locations or certain gardens every single Tuesday or Wednesday, say, I am going to start that by scouting on those days. And it's really easy nowadays with like online tools, because you can literally make appointments with yourself, or if you have to incorporate other staff members into it, you can add them to those appointments. And it's easy to shift things if stuff has to change, especially when we're working in outdoor environments. But it keeps everybody on the same page, and also kind of keeps it at the front of your mind. The other way to keep this at the front of your mind and not let it get away from you is to do it first or to do it early. Don't make scouting your end-of-day task. Make it your first task for the day. As soon as you walk into the greenhouses, after you do something, or as soon as you walk into that landscape, try to make it that priority, because it's so easy to get bogged down with so many other things that you just let it fall off the end of your day and you go, well, I'll push it back a day, and then you never get to it. The next thing I'm going to talk about is this concept of how frequently you should be scouting. Most people are like, do I need to scout every day? You don't need to scout every day. There might be certain crops in which you do want to scout every day, especially if you're in a time frame where they're very susceptible to a particular pest, or they're getting ready to go out onto display or production. And so this is when you do want to spend a little bit more time with it. But generally, you don't need to scout every single day. And what you can do is things like, most insect species are going through their various life cycles, and these life cycles are impacted by different environmental factors. And these can be artificial environmental factors, like in an urban environment or in a greenhouse environment, or they can be external ones. But a lot of times it has to do with temperature, light cycles, those kinds of things. But many of the pest species that we tend to see, especially in regards to insects, tend to change their development within a range of 7 to 14 days. You can see a change from an egg to a caterpillar to an adult. So that's why I say, if you can't do it, every single week, 14 days, even sometimes 21 days, depending on what you're working with and what the conditions are, is more than enough time between scouting to see what you need to see before it's going to cause serious damage. So don't be afraid that you need to do this every single day. The great thing about IPM is that it gives you ways to really monitor for the various types of pest species. And I pull this one up because depending on where you are, you might be dealing with the fact that there are new pests that are arriving in your area, or you're seeing pests at slightly different times. And I'll cover that a little bit more in a moment. But the big one for us is that IPM, Integrated Pest Management, is a fantastic tool for being able to look at when new invasive species or new pests are entering your area. Because what you should be doing is, as soon as new plants arrive, say you've ordered something from a nursery, you should be inspecting them, you should be scouting them, and you want to take a look. And this helps us as an industry overall and through landscapes, large landscapes, to be able to identify when pests are starting to reach different areas and how quickly they're moving. And this can also help with slowing the spread of different invasive species and pests that are moving around. So really use IPM as a tool to help yourself, but also to help your neighbors. Climate change is impacting the way that pests are responding to things, but also to when we're seeing them. So a lot of us, we're seeing more extremes in temperature, but one of the things you might notice is that you are having warmer temperatures and warmer days earlier in the season. And then you're also seeing them extending further into the end of the season. What does this mean for you from a pest standpoint is that you're probably going to see more pests. You might notice that a species where you only had 1 or 2 generations per year, you're now going to start getting partial generations and new generations, additional ones. So it means that you're going to have pests on the landscape for even longer. So this is really important because you need to be able to adapt to that, because you don't want to miss one of those critical windows of time to actually do something about pest management in your area. And again, this is something that we're going to see continue to change. It also means that species are expanding into new areas as certain areas are becoming warmer during certain parts of the season. So these are all things to keep in mind when you're thinking about integrated pest management and how it relates to climate change. So you've been doing your scouting. Did you write it down? That is always the next question. Most people love or don't love to scout, but they see something, they're like, great, I'll keep that in my mind. But then they walk away from it. And then a few days later, go, what did I see? So the next big thing I always tell people is record keeping. Make sure that you actually make notes of what you're seeing. And this is so important to you. And there are so many ways in which you can record keep. I actually use all of these in some different combination here at the Smithsonian Gardens because we have such a large property and there's different ways in which to record what we're seeing. The tried and true method is definitely the notepad. Just go out there with a notepad that you have dedicated to scouting and write your notes into it. Put a date next to it. Please always put dates. Dates will help you in the long run. The next one is if you have something that pops up that's really important, sticky notes are great for drawing your attention very quickly, but they're not usually good for detailed notes. We have a developed scouting sheet here, one that I use a lot of times and can often give to other people. It's a very basic sort of form. It covers things such as like, what is the plant? What is the pest? Estimated number, proposed plan of action, and additional notes. And I tend to have larger blocks just because I write so much into my scouting notes and I want to be able to be as detailed as I possibly can. But you can make yours a lot thinner if you're just trying to get to the basics. The one that I do want to point out on here is definitely the idea of estimated numbers. You are not always going to want to take action, but it is good to note from time to time how things are changing. Do you notice that you have a pest population that starts out very small, rapidly ramps up, and then all of a sudden drops down? These are things that your notes are going to help you to kind of analyze as you go on, and so that you make better decisions in the future when you're trying to use your integrated pest management program. The other side of this is that we live in such a great age in terms of technology, and you should really use technology to help you. A lot of us around here carry our work phones with us. They all have notepad functions on them. It's really easy for me to just pull up my notes on my phone and be able to look at them and see what I've written and type down some new notes or make adjustments very quickly. The other one I really like is being able to use my online calendar. So as I was saying before, you wanted to set up your scouting dates. Do this as well with the things that you've been doing. Let yourself know when you're going to release beneficial insects, when you're going to try different programs, or when you might want to change things out. Or if you know that there's a week in there when you think that you're supposed to see a particular pest and you want to pay extra attention to it. And the great thing about online calendars is that, one, you can share it with other people, but you can easily search these functions. You can go back and look and see exactly when you did that in previous years. And it just gives you a resource to really check yourself and check when you want to do things and put it on your calendar to remind yourself ahead of time. The other piece of technology I think is completely underutilized for scouting and record keeping is photos. Photos on your phone are fantastic in the sense that they are tagged and they can be searched by subject. They can be searched by location. They have their date. So again, you get all of this vital information that you didn't even necessarily put in there just by taking this picture. And it's easy to search this information, but it also gives you an easy way to share exactly what you're seeing with other teammates so that they can say, I didn't see the same thing you were seeing. What did you see here? And you can show them exactly that through a picture. So it's funny to just talk about very basic technology that helps you do IPM very easily and be able to share that information with others. So integrated pest management is a science-based decision-making process. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that you scouted, you took your notes, don't file them away forever. Those notes are gold to you in the sense that you should be using them. You should be following up with them. So particularly for me, I have a 2-week rotation where I try and get out and scout during our main growing season. And before I go out to a particular site that I know I've been to before and I have scouting notes for, I sit down just for a few minutes. You don't need a lot of time. Like, I don't want you to feel like this is a daunting major time investment, but I take a few minutes and I just refresh myself on the notes that I had from 2 weeks ago, because a lot changes in 2 weeks and you might forget some things, but it lets me focus on what I need to look at again and what I want to, like, what is changing. And if it's not changing, then maybe we need to check a different management plan. So really make sure that you're going back and looking. And then at least once a year, I would highly recommend that you sit down with all of your notes and really see what happened. Try to get the big picture from it for your various sites, for your specialty crops, things that are of high priority to you, and then use that to make better plans for the future. This is all here to help you make better use of your time, your energy, your staff. So IPM is a tool for you to use if you use it correctly. The other thing is, there are so many resources and there's so many untapped resources that people don't usually realize are around them that can help them. And so I always like to start out with a few different ones that are really helpful, especially when you aren't a plant specialist or you aren't, or not plant specialist, but you're not a pest species specialist. And that's very intimidating for a lot of people because they don't always feel like they know, well, I don't really know diseases. I don't really know insects, but there's a lot of tools out there that are going to help you start to look at the right times and for the right things. So the first one I always talk about is phenology and growing degree days, because I feel like these two things go very hand in hand. The big one for me is phenology. Phenology is very easy. You go outside and you see that buds are breaking, and you know that for this particular plant, if it's in bloom, that means that you need to be looking out for this particular pest because that's the same time that they hatch. And having this connection of life cycles is really a good just visual cue. It's constant reminder when you're walking out in the gardens. And the more you kind of ingrain that into yourself, the easier it'll be just to kind of see, right, these are leafing out. That means we're getting leaf beetles in the next 2 weeks. But there's a lot of online resources for that as well. So if you don't have this inherently known, you can print out various types of pest predictive reports. Now, part of those pest predictive reports is going to be growing degree days. This is a calculation that uses heat units. It's a really cool science if you ever really want to get into it, but you don't need to, because a lot of different pest newsletters and a lot of groups will give you your growing degree information, and then they'll show you a chart that literally says, you know what, you're at this many growing degree days. This is when you see this pest. And the reason this is so important is because if you have a pest that is only out one time of year, you don't want to waste your time the rest of the year looking for that pest. You want to target that window of when you know that that pest is going to be out there, and growing degree days and phenology help you do that. One of the other things that really will help you do that is getting signed up for pest alerts and your extension newsletters. So we're very lucky that in this area, we have a lot of access to different pest newsletters. We're very close to University of Maryland. They have a great one. They have an email system that you can get signed up for every week through the growing season. They will send you pest alerts and they'll tell you what to expect and what to be looking for, or what other people are seeing in that area. And these are really helpful because this might not always be at the forefront of your mind, but it helps you just kind of bring back around, like, you're right, we're getting to that time of year when I swear I see June beetles or I see grubs in the turf. You know what, do I need to be treating for this now, or should I have treated for this months ago, which is usually the case when they were still, when they weren't adults yet. And so things like that are all resources that are available to you. But again, I understand that it can be a little bit intimidating sometimes when you think about the fact that it's like, oh, there's all this information and I don't know it. Take advantage of the fact that there are entomologists, plant biologists, plant pathologists, those types of people. And a lot of extension agencies around you are available to you. Don't be afraid to use them. There's also a lot of apps out there that will start to help you with this stuff. So don't be embarrassed. Go for it. Dig in and learn as much as you can, because in the long run, it's going to help you make better management choices. One of the examples I use is that, a lot of people don't realize that most insect species are non-feeding sometimes as adults. And so you really only have that immature stage to do something about the damage. And for a lot of people with things like scale insects in particular, they try to treat the adults, and the adults are really difficult to treat. But if you can time it well and you can use those growing degree days or that phenology or even those pest alerts to say, you know what, this is when the crawlers, which is that immature stage, is out there, you have such a higher success rate if you actually apply your beneficial insects or your horticultural oil or something like that during that time period. And it means that you can use less toxic, you don't have to use these heavy chemicals. You can use good biological controls, but it's all about timing and using your time wisely so that you're being the most effective that you can be. And I think with that, I've run out of time, but you're going to hear a lot more wonderful presentations. I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my part of this. I hope that you get a chance to come out and visit us in DC. And with that, I will turn it over to Richard.
That's really great, Holly. Thank you so much. We're going to hold questions until the end. So now I'd like to invite Drew Asbury from Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens to give our second presentation. Drew.
Okay, thank you, Richard. How does the screen look? Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Drew Asbury, and it's certainly my pleasure to be here today to speak to you about our journey of reducing pesticide use here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, we are the former home of Marjorie Merriweather Post, and we are a 25-acre property in Northwest Washington, D.C. We have a staff of 12 gardeners and 80 horticulture volunteers, and we do not have a specific IPM coordinator, but rather all the individual gardeners are responsible for the IPM in their own areas. So our reduction in pesticides has been a slow and steady process over the past 6 or 7 years, but it's basically reached into every nook and cranny of the garden. So in our limited time today, I'm going to focus on the areas that I supervise and share some tips and success stories of what has worked well for us in our greenhouse complex, as well as in our cutting garden. So here we see the super basic pyramid of IPM, which Holly and Braley are both more experts on this than I am. So I'm not going to get too technical today, other than to say, when I first started at Hillwood about 10 years ago, we were certainly on a very conventional pesticide program and applying a lot of chemicals, particularly in the greenhouse. And we were making, cocktails of pesticides and rotating every chemical class that we could, including all those big ones, right? The neonicotinoids, the organophosphates, the pyrethroids. And because of this, we were not using any biological controls at all. And I cannot put the blame on all my predecessors, because I also came into Hillwood with a very heavy chemical frame of mind, and really thought that was going to be one of my best attributes to this new organization, was coming up with this big spray program. Well, little did we know, as much as we tried, we were not getting the results we wanted. So for one reason or another, in August of 2015, we released our first biocontrol, which was a little predatory mite called Phytocilius persimilis. And it was to help control two-spotted spider mites. And luckily for us, right off the bat, we had some success. And then for the next 5 years or so, we were in this transition period of slowly releasing or increasing different releases of different biological controls and beneficial insects, while at the same time, reducing our pesticides and switching out those worst pesticides, maybe the ones with the most toxicity or longest residuals, with less toxic or more biosafe pesticides. So now I'm proud to say that we're approaching our 2-year anniversary of growing almost organic. And so besides using a handful of biopesticides, we truly are relying the absolute most now on biological controls, including here seen in this photo on the right. That's one of our favorites. That's one of the little lacewing larvae searching for prey on one of the Phalaenopsis blooms. And so here at Hillwood, we have a total of 7 greenhouses, 5 of which house our collection of nearly 2,000 orchids. And in those houses, we've historically struggled the most with thrips and mealybug. And then we always have some scales, spider mites, and aphids to a lesser degree. And then in our production greenhouse, aphids have historically been the major battle year round. And then thrips and spider mites become quite problematic during the summer and fall when we're growing chrysanthemums in our production space. So here are the actual beneficial insects that have worked best for us and that we've been using for the past 7 years. We've gotten into a pretty good routine now of releasing beneficials about every 2 to 3 weeks for our greenhouse complex, and we budget approximately about $1,000 a month for beneficial insects. So I'm going to start off right away with our success stories. Those are the ones highlighted in green. Again, I already mentioned spider mites, and they were never much of a problem with our orchid collection, but our greenhouses are also jammed with a lot of tropical plants. So it was certainly something we needed to work with. So for our spider mites, again, it's that Persimilis, the little two-spotted, to control two-spotted spider mites. And we really have almost come to the point of eradication of spider mites in the greenhouse. And we've also used these successfully in our interior plantscapes, inside the museum and inside of our visitor center. So I think these are always one of the first ones I recommend to anyone that's interested, you know, as an immediate confidence booster. If you want to step into biocontrol, try Phytosilius persimilis. So I would say the more exciting success story for us was with our thrips, just partly because of just how many thrips we had and the damage that they caused. You know, thrips spread very quickly. They're piercing mouth parts, vector disease and virus. And then, you know, they're rasping, they distort flowers and they shorten flower span. So not a good situation to have in an orchid greenhouse. And maybe we weren't quite as successful as quickly, but yet we do have very low levels now. We really attribute that mostly to Amblyceus cucumaris, which is another predatory mite. And then earlier on in our transitional periods, when we had much higher populations of thrips, we were releasing aureus. So one way, as Holly mentioned, that whole idea of scouting is so important. We do a scouting once a week in our greenhouses. And for thrips, we do the white paper test, where we are literally taking a sheet of white paper out into the greenhouse. We literally hold that underneath the flowers of the orchids. We do a little bit of a gentle tap, and basically we see what falls out. And for us, that has been our thrip technique now for going on 7 years. And it's a really good way to get a quick feel for how many thrips that you have in your greenhouse. So I'll talk about aphids on the next slide, and then they're highlighted in yellow is kind of a success story. That's our long-tailed mealybug was our other like really major pest that we had at critical thresholds. And for those, we rely almost exclusively on lacewing larvae, which is the Chrysaloperla there. And we also, you know, we love those lacewing larvae because they also feed on thrips and aphids. So it's a really great generalist feeders that we're huge fans of. And then unfortunately, they're highlighted in red. You know, scales have become our #1 issue that we're really focusing all of our attention on now. We probably have more species of scale and slightly higher numbers than we've ever had. Unfortunately, there are less beneficial insects for scales, and particularly the Bois d'Aval scale. So if anybody listening has great advice for Bois d'Aval scale, please reach out. But for scale in general, we do release parasitic wasp Aphidus, as well as the purple scale beetle. And the jury is still out a little bit on you know, how well they are providing control for us. So in our production greenhouse, we grow 3 crops a year, and this is super nice because that means 3 times a year the greenhouse is basically emptied out, which allows us a chance to do this really deep cleaning and sanitation, which is hugely helpful. And we really only battle thrips and spider mites during our chrysanthemum season and during our winter cut flower production crops. So, but fortunately in this house, which is not open to the general public, we really love using the slow release sachets of that cucumaris, that same predatory mite, for thrips, and they also will nibble on if some spider mites will appear. So, but for us, those slow release sachets, you know, that it provides a little bit more extended control. And for our mum crop, we will hang 1 little sachet on every 2nd or 3rd plant once those plants are big enough that their leaves begin to touch, so the mites can spread across the crop. And then for aphids, we really rely on 2 different beneficial insects. The first is the parasitic wasp Aphidius. We release these fairly regularly and pretty early on before we see signs of outbreaks in the greenhouse. So for instance, we know every single March we're going to get aphids on our pansy crops. So we don't wait to see those aphids. We release proactively. And then once those aphids do appear, that's when we'll come in and release some of the Chrysaloperla or the lacewing larvae to help combat actual colonies that we find. So besides relying heavily on these beneficial insects, we still keep this small arsenal of either organic chemicals or more friendly biopesticides. Our go-to products nowadays are Botanigard, Azotin, oil, and soap and rubbing alcohol. Our volunteers are amazing at performing mechanical controls of using Q-tips dipped into rubbing alcohol, where they are, physically swiping off those pests, which works particularly well for mealybug and scale on our orchid collection. We're also switching out traditional fungicides here at Hillwood, and we're big fans of Root Shield in the greenhouse, as well as our home brewed compost tea, which was originally really for our outdoor garden spaces, but now we enjoy using that in the greenhouse as well. And then, of course, there's all these other layers of the IPM pyramid that Holly was alluding to as well that I wish we had more time to discuss. But things like prevention, which, just simply keeping the bugs out in the first place. And again, I also cannot stress the importance of regular scouting and identifying pests, which allows you to catch pest populations early on before they get out of control. And then I'll also argue that, releasing beneficial insects proactively before you have a problem, rather than reactively, would also fall into this category of prevention. And then lastly, culturally, we do our best to keep our greenhouse structure, clean and sanitized and weed free. And, we'll quickly remove infestations if we can. And, if we can't avoid growing problem crops, we'll certainly keep a close eye on them during those weekly scouting missions. So switching gears a bit to end my part of the presentation, we're going to flip outside to the cutting garden. And rather than releasing beneficial insects, now what we're doing is we're just doing everything we can in our cutting garden to conserve natural predators by building and promoting healthy habitats for all sorts of insects. So in the cutting garden, we've completely eliminated 100% use of pesticides other than our homebrewed compost tea. And for a very short time, we did release beneficials, but now we've realized that we simply don't have to do that if we design and maintain the garden in a manner that promotes natural pest control. So the picture on the left is from 2016, 7 years ago, when the garden was planted in a very traditional style. Everything was laid out in a grid and straight rows, and plants were put, crops were blocked together as one block of plants. We relied very heavily on annuals, which meant there was just this huge amount of turnover in the garden where we were ripping and removing crops, exposing bare soil, and it was particularly bare in the wintertime. And then at the same time, we were occasionally applying pesticides. So, all of this combined was just not necessarily creating prime habitat for beneficial insects. The picture on the right was taken from last summer. And now we rely much, much heavier on perennial plantings, many of which are native plants. We're no longer growing crops in big monocultural blocks. And we have found that this, combined with the absence of pesticides, we now have a much more structurally diverse biomass in the garden that's just teeming with life, with all those good bugs that we were hoping to attract. And so I should mention too that, many of these same ideas and principles were simultaneously going on in other areas of the gardens at Hillwood too. Reducing pesticides is just one variable in Hillwood's strategic plan to be better stewards of the environment. And to transform our gardens into a much healthier spaces, not only for insects, but also for our staff and volunteers and our public. So nowadays, when we do plant annuals, we intermingle them rather than growing them as a single block of one type of flower. And this has been particularly helpful for controlling damage caused by a cucumber beetle on amaranthus or a love-lies bleeding. As you can see, that's the chain-like flower on the right. Cucumber beetle has been a horrible pest in the cutting garden for many, many years. And often there's just complete crop failures because they will literally eat all the leaves, basically. So we've always practiced rotating crops, but now This was a picture, the middle picture was taken last May, where we're intermingling warm season annuals of amaranthus with marigolds and gomphrenias, and intermingling them in with what was already self-sown larkspur in the garden and some dahlia perennials to kind of make this medley. And we had the best amaranthus crop that we've had in years as a result. So it's a coincidence, I don't know. We're going to trial it again next year. And now what we're doing across all of the gardens is we're really starting to turn more attention to promoting healthy soils. And so in this garden, for instance, we no longer till, but rather we top dress the garden with a 1 or 2 inch layer of compost each spring. And our hope is that healthier soil life will then contain predators that will help control, the egg and larval stages of the cucumber beetle, which live in the soil. And then lastly, we are also adjusting, how we maintain our gardens to allow beneficial insects to complete their entire life cycle in the garden. So in recent years, we've certainly jumped on the bandwagon of leave the leaves and, keeping those leaves in the garden rather than removing them in the fall and then replacing them with mulch in the spring, as had been tradition. And then this spring, I fully embraced the chop and drop method for the first time in the cutting garden. And this is where all plant material in the perennial borders were left upright, all winter long to provide winter habitat. And then about 2 weeks ago, I finally got out there, I chopped everything down, but rather than hauling all that away to the compost pile, all those stems were allowed to lay in place with the goal that, of trying to keep that habitat in place as best as I could for all those insects that are overwintering there. So here at Hillwood, as I'm sure with many of your organizations, our journey of reducing pesticides, and developing healthier gardens is certainly ongoing. And I do hope today that some of the stories we share across all the speakers will help inspire you and your organizations to continue your own journey. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and hand it back over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Drew. That was great. Now I'd like to turn it over to Braley Burke, who's from Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens. Braley.
Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Can everyone hear me and see the presentation? Cool. All right, so Drew and Holly talked about how to use integrated pest management in your gardens, greenhouses, outdoor spaces, and plant spaces overall. I'm here to talk to you about how integrated pest management can actually be implemented and used for urban pest management or pest management in your cafes, break rooms, office spaces, places where you'll get different types of pests and you'll want to keep them at lower levels. Something that's unique about that type of integrated pest management is that for growing plants, you can have a few aphids on your plants and you can be like, okay, don't need to do anything about that. But if you have a few cockroaches in your office, that's not necessarily acceptable. So integrated pest management can be a little more challenging in that regard. So as both of them mentioned, what is IPM? Integrated pest management is when you combine a lot of different strategies to combat an issue. And you just have to figure out what methods work synergistically together to have the best outcome for your pest management. So you don't necessarily want to rely heavily on any one of these things, but rather use them together. With pest management in structural areas like kitchens, cafes, things like that, a lot of people think that chemical control is the go-to. Hence why whenever I used to do pest management or urban pest management at restaurants, they'd say, the exterminator's here. That's not necessarily the case. You can actually use a lot of different tools to manage your pests and not have to use chemical control unless it's an emergency situation. So urban IPM is not all about chemical control. What it is about is prevention, exclusion, and sanitation. A lot of it is really very common sense. Like, are you keeping your area clean? Are you checking your plants that you're putting in the cafe for cockroaches or something like that before you're putting them in? And also just keeping your pests out of your building. So we're going to go a little more into that, but the main takeaway is keep your pests away. Keeping your pests away is the most important thing you need to do. What do pests want? They want food on your floors. They want water and food debris in grout or other cracks. A lot of times when you can't figure out where your fruit fly population is from, it's because the grout under your counters actually hasn't been filled in for a while, and now there's gross food debris in it. Making sure that you don't have old garbage. If you look at this picture, Phipps actually takes out their trash every night to make sure that we don't have a buildup of pests or attract pests to our cafe. And also just making sure you don't have dirty drains. That's very important. So another aspect is correctly identifying your pests. Why is this important? As Holly said, integrated pest management is scientifically based, and knowing what different pests you're dealing with, what their different behaviors, preferences, and overall how they live helps you manage them properly. For example, if you saw this flying around your office space, you might think they were fruit flies unless you correctly identified it as a fungus gnat. You might think, oh, there's some sort of food debris around, maybe a clogged drain, something like that. When in reality, it's probably you have an office plant that's overwatered and the fungus gnats are breeding in the pot. So you can just reduce moisture in your pots to help manage those fungus gnats. And there are different things that come up like that. Like when you know you have rodents, knowing whether you have a mouse versus a rat is very important. When you have ants, it's important to know what type of ant you're dealing with. So correctly identifying your pests is not only important in the greenhouses, but also important in your kitchens. The top offenders, I'm going to go through these 4 and how we manage them at Phipps. There are ants, rodents, flies, and cockroaches. Those are the big ones that we deal with. For rodent management, a big thing for rodent management is just exclusion. Keep the interior and exterior of your building from having entry points for rodents. If you look at the doors to our special events hall, which is actually right next to our conservatory room, the tropical forest room, to make sure that no pests are getting into that space, we have our doors tightly sealed, meaning no mice or roaches or hopefully no ants can get into it. So making sure you have door sweeps and things like that is very important. Also, removing debris or weeds outside can be really beneficial. If you look at the side of this building, there aren't wooden boards stacked against it or bushes that are right against the building. Whenever that happens, actually, it provides rodents a place to live, but also an area to conceal themselves. So they may be gnawing at the side of your building and making an entry point, or there may be an entry point that is blocked by that area. So it's important to keep all of those areas around your building clear to keep rodents out. And limit where food is allowed. This was found in one of the office buildings. So even having cough drops can actually attract pests. In this case, it was a mouse. Luckily, only one, but it's important to have clear rules with your staff on where food can be kept so that you can manage the pests that are going into your spaces where you don't want pests. You can keep them out. For ant management, keep your areas clean. They're attracted to food dropped on the floor, water, substances that are not being properly cleaned up. This is our break room. It's swept every night. Everybody's supposed to clean up and wipe down their spaces when they're finished eating, and that helps keep a clean environment so that we don't get pests. Check plants before bringing them into food areas to make sure that ants aren't going to invade our cafe. We make sure that there aren't any ant nests in our potted plants before we bring them in there. Yeah, and moving on to cockroach management. Once again, keep your areas clean. Our cafe is kept clean so that it's pleasant for everyone, and things like cockroaches and ants stay away. Once again, check your plants. This is a roach hanging out in an orchid pot. So it's important to make sure you're inspecting your plants before putting them into areas where you really don't want pests. Specifically for cockroach management, to keep cockroaches out of our different buildings and our food spaces or office spaces, we will submerge the roots of the plants that we're bringing from the greenhouses into those areas. We'll submerge them for 10 minutes in water, and then we'll repot them just to make sure that no cockroaches are hiding in the root systems. And this has been really great and helped us keep cockroaches out of places we really don't want them. Also, using sticky traps to monitor is important so that you're not unnecessarily treating for pests, and you're also catching the problem early, so you may not have to deal with it in a more serious way. Like, you won't have to fumigate your place because you caught the cockroaches early. And if you do have to treat for your pests, then use a contained bait system, and make sure you're researching what kind of baits you're using to make sure that you're being as mindful as possible, and also rotating baits so that you don't have a super population of cockroaches that live no matter what you do. Lastly, fly management. This is once again all about cleanliness. In our break room, I have to put up signs sometimes like, don't leave dishes soaking in the sink, or use the garbage disposal. Don't just leave your old noodles in the drain, because that is how you get flies. And fun fact, if you use the word maggot, it is actually very good at getting people to do those things, because when they hear maggot, they're like, oh, okay, I'll actually clean my dishes. Kind of works. Flies like messy spaces, so yeah, keep your areas clean. You also may need to flush your drains that aren't used often. This is also true for cockroaches. Whenever you have a drain connected to a bigger system and it's not really being used, or it's just a slow drip, then it can be an area for flies to breed in, and also a little highway for the cockroaches. So flushing those drains nightly, if you have issues with them, or if you think there might be an issue, is a great way to keep pests away. So with this in mind, I would like you to consider, for your reducing pesticide use, scheduling inspections of your building to make sure that there are no points of entry. So go around your building, look on the outside and the inside, and see where pests could possibly be getting in, what might be a good way to deter them. Door sweeps are a big thing to consider. Like, they're great. Plugging holes where like the AC is going into your building, things like that. Sometimes there's a crack around it, and things you don't want can get into the building. If your pinky can fit, then a mouse can fit, so think about that. Take trash out every night and use lids. Using lids helps keep pests out, and then taking the trash out every night stops your pest population from building. Be careful about plants in eating areas. Please inspect them before bringing them into your area. Whenever you get them in, you might want to consider repotting them just to make sure that they don't have anything that you're introducing. and enforce strict rules for cleanliness in kitchens, offices, and break rooms. And this can also include educating your staff, your kitchen staff or cleaning staff, and making sure that they know what they need to be doing to stop pests from getting into those areas. Integrated pest management, fun fact, is for everyone. Everyone can utilize it. Everyone most likely does utilize it. It's good to be aware though and think about how you can improve your strategies and make it more effective for your institution. And lastly, communicate your wishes with your pest control technician. If you do have a pest control technician and you talk about wanting to reduce pesticides, then they should be able to work with you, and they won't necessarily, hopefully, be like, oh no, you have to spray monthly or you'll get all the stuff. They should be able to cooperate with you and help you manage your pests in a way that works for you. And with that, I believe it is time for questions.
Thank you, Braley. That was great. I'm now going to turn it over to Annie Schrock, who's going to manage the question and answer session. Annie.
Thanks, Richard. I just want to reiterate, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat now or directly message me. I first want to thank all of our speakers for coming out and talking about these specific aspects of IPM and urban IPM. I'm going to go ahead with our first question, which is, Holly talked a little bit, well, a lot about this, but what does a typical scouting season look like at your organization? How long does it last? Who's involved? Are there any tools and equipment involved in the recording system? Holly, I know you talked a little bit about this, so Drew and Braley, if you want to talk about this, or if there's anything else you want to mention, Holly?
Nope, I open the floor to them.
That was a very long question.
That's a five-parter. Braley, why don't you take it? Then I can add something.
Okay, I will try to cover all the bases, kind of all blurred together. But as far as scouting at Phipps, a lot of it is I will do my scheduled scouting, which is around every 2 weeks, probably less often outside. And then the horticulture staff also scouts with me, and I do educational things with them frequently, where I make sure they know what they're doing. They all have their pesticide applicator license, mainly just so they know about IPM, they know pesticide safety. So within 6 months of being hired, everybody has to get that. For scouting, we do use the white paper sheet like Drew to look for thrips. We always have a magnifying glass with us to make sure we can look for if we're like, oh, is that a speck of dirt or a spider mite? Like, oh, magnifying glass. But really just going through and looking at all the different plant benches or plants in the conservatory, looking under leaves, where the stem and leaf meet, those kinds of areas, the root system, just to make sure everything looks healthy. I run through and do that all the time, but also take a slower approach on my schedule. It's a team effort. And Drew, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a team effort for sure. And I'll add that at Hillwood, we have a quarterly plant healthcare meeting. So it's where kind of a majority of the staff come together. So at least we can get on the same page about, so many things overlap, right? So that's one thing I'd recommend. And then for us in the greenhouse in particular, we do have a weekly scouting session, but really it's part of our weekly check-in. So, it's on the calendar for every Monday at 10:30, right? We spend an hour myself with our orchid specialist, or I'll spend an hour with our greenhouse grower. And we're really talking about everything, but yet the entire time we're out in the space and we are tapping, the white tapping on white paper is amazing. easy technique. And then for like flats and bedding plants, you know, we try to get down to eye level with things and really try to get, you know, and take our time. And of course, we're assessing all the health and all that as well. But yeah, definitely back when we were more chemical heavy, the scouting wasn't necessarily as much of an issue, it seemed. But yeah, with trying to reduce the pesticide use, I can't stress enough about scouting. So I think there were some of those parts of that question I forgot, but hopefully that got us started.
Actually, you made me think about the fact that there are a lot of great tools to take with you when you go out. And one of the big things that, you know, of course, we encourage is people to have hand lenses and to add your hand lenses to a keychain so that you can clip it onto your keys so you never lose them. The other thing is having a soil knife or a way to dig at root systems so you can look at them. The white paper is actually the funniest thing that I tell people, always have a piece of paper because the tap method is incredibly useful. One of the things I was going to bring up is that we have started using digital microscopes that plug right into your phones, which is really great because you also get to, you scout at a microscopic level, but you can take video while you do it. So you get all that fine detail. And they're not very expensive and they work with all kinds of technology. So that's some of the really cool new tools that are coming out with this. And I guess the last thing I would say is make sure you have like a good pruners or knife so that if you need to check below the surface of any bark or anything, or you need to cut into a stem, that you're doing it in a safe way, that you're not inflicting injuries that are going to cause more plant health problems after the fact. So make sure your tools are sharp if you're going to use them.
I'm going to go with one more question before we wrap this up. Braley, this is going to be more directed at you, but have you used nematodes for cockroach control in a greenhouse environment?
That might also be relevant to Drew and his orchid collection because I assume he has cockroaches, and Holly may also deal with roaches. I have not. I use nematodes for thrips, but not cockroaches. Honestly, I don't know that much about using it for cockroaches. I don't know if you guys do.
Fortunately, we have not had that experience here at Hillwood yet, so cross my fingers.
Very lucky.
So I just want to go ahead, Holly.
Oh, I was just going to say, we haven't used it for that either. We tend to use bait stations and things like that along with sanitation. So I find that to be more effective. Again, nematodes are fantastic for a variety of other soil pest dwelling insects and pests, but definitely haven't tried it for cockroaches yet.
Well, with all that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Richard to give a conclusion. I just want to again thank everyone for coming out here today. And go ahead, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Annie. And I want to thank everyone again today for attending. And I want to thank our speakers, Holly, Drew, and Braley. A recording of this webinar will be made available to participants to share with others. I will send out that link to you within the coming week. In the meantime, we hope everyone has a wonderful spring and look forward to connecting with you in the months to come. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.